Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the MacBook Air M2 model and see how this specific MacBook holds up in 2023. Now, what's funny is this MacBook had just came out not even that long ago, and I personally do think that it's still completely worth buying, but I will say that for the brand new price of this MacBook, you could probably buy like an M1 Pro 14-inch MacBook, or even like the standard M1 MacBook Pro, or even like the standard M1 MacBook Air, and save a bunch of money. Maybe not with the M1 Pro model, but with the M1 MacBook Air model, you can save a lot more money in the used market, and that might be something to keep in mind. If you just want to save the most amount of money, that might be something you want to take a look at. But if you don't really care about it, then the M2 MacBook Air I think is a very decent deal. I know tons of people who own this. I've personally owned this thing, and it was a pretty good MacBook. It didn't really stand out in any way, but I think it's a good one for the price I would kind of estimate. So if you want to pick it up, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of these MacBooks, the first thing you have to keep in mind is that the MacBook Air lineup is not supposed to be their flagship device. It's supposed to be like a cheap MacBook that they kind of make, that they kind of throw together, and they can sell it for many, many years. And it's a good price MacBook. It still has lots of features, but it's probably one of those MacBooks you're going to buy, and you're probably going to, forget about it in a way. Like, you're going to get it. It's a good quality MacBook that still has, tons of features built in, and it's still something that I always look at and surprised that Apple's still making, because sometimes they kind of take away from their Pro sales. Take a look at the M1 MacBook Air and the M1 MacBook Pro. The Air sold very well as far as I'm concerned. Now, on the top of the MacBook Air, you have that standard Apple logo, not glowing. We kind of already know this. And I think it's a pretty good design. Like I said before, I think it looks good. There's not really a lot to complain about there. And I definitely do think that Apple did a really good job with the top. It's like matte textured a little bit. And I think it looks pretty cool. They did make a pretty significant change though, the way it looks coming from the standard M1 MacBook Air model. But I think that's a cool thing, and I definitely do think, Apple knocked it out of the park here. Now, on the side of this MacBook, you actually have something that's really awesome that I actually like a lot that Apple threw in here. So on the right side of this MacBook, you do have that, just the standard USB cables. You have like the standard USB Thunderbolt cables that you can plug in. You can connect it to docks, you can connect it to whatever you want to. But on the other side of this MacBook, you have the ability of having that MagSafe, charging cord, or charging port for that matter. And that is something that I really do like, and it kind of fixed one of my pet peeves about the M1 Pro and M1, but the M1 MacBook Air and the M1, MacBook Pro, is because if you wanted to charge that MacBook, you had to plug it in on one side, and if you had the charger on the other side, like if you were laying down on your bed or something, depending on how you're laying down, you actually probably had to have the wires swinging around your lap, and it was very annoying. Now you have the ability of plugging and charging your specific MacBook from one side or the other. That is something that's really cool, and I love that for this MacBook. And for those of you who have an M2 MacBook Air, you will know that it is a much better experience doing something like that, rather than having to go ahead and change up your whole entire way you're sitting because of the, charging cord. Now, the MagSafe capability is awesome, but it is, I would have loved to have seen another USB Type-C cord or port on the other side. We are only getting them on one side still, but I do think probably with the next couple of generations of MacBook Airs, there may be some changes. I guess we're going to have to see what happens, but that's definitely something that's up their alley, and I think it could be something Apple could end up doing in the future. Now, on the bottom, you just have the, standard, laptop, legs, feet, whatever you want to call them. You have the screws and everything, which is pretty cool. But another funny thing with this MacBook is how thin this MacBook is. It is insane, the thinness behind this MacBook. You can literally if you thought the original MacBook Air was thin, or even the M1 MacBook Air was thin, this thing is a very thin machine, and it's insane because you wouldn't think this MacBook had this much power behind it. So I love this MacBook because it's super thin. It could be a problem for some people just because the components may not be that great, the battery life may not be that great either, sometimes, but people have been saying battery life has been pretty decent. But most people who are buying MacBook Airs probably aren't, super power users anyway, to be honest. But I think Apple did a great job here, and the outside before you flip this thing open is pretty insane. But also, this is another big thing. When you flip this thing open for the very first time, you will actually see that this thing does have a different design quite a bit than the last MacBook Air that came out right before it. You are now getting this notch design with the display pushed out a little bit more. So in this case, you're getting a 13.6-inch liquid retina display, and this is something that's really cool. This is something that, you're getting a notch, which is very similar to how the 14-inch MacBook Pros looked. You're getting the, display pretty much pushed out to the edge. I definitely do think this is a really smart approach from Apple, because if they hadn't have done this, then we would have been stuck in like a weird limbo phase where like this MacBook just like the same design over and over again. Maybe it changed up a little bit, but it really wasn't that big of a design change. But with this one, that's not quite the case. I think Apple did a great job with this design, and I think that in and of itself is a really cool thing. I think this notched design is going to be here for the next like 4 years probably. So if you get this MacBook today, it's probably going to be around probably for the next 4 years or so. They may move it around and make it smaller, but it's probably not going to change too much if I'm being honest. Now on the bottom half, you do actually get the keyboard and the trackpad. This has always stayed consistent with any MacBook out there. This keyboard is very nice. I like it. It travels, or it doesn't travel. It has a good amount of travel. It's not going to fail on you like the other butterfly keyboards. The trackpad is really nice too. And I think it's a very good machine overall. So that kind of covers up that on the outside of this device. I think Apple's done a tremendous job with this laptop, and at least on the outside it looks good. Internally though, there are some customizability things you can do. So you can get an 8-core CPU that comes standard. You can get up to a 10-core GPU, which is pretty cool. You can get up to 24 gigabytes of RAM. Now the base models do not have that, so keep that in mind, but you can spec it out up to 24 gigs and it's going to increase the price tag, but you have that ability of doing that. You can get up to 2 terabytes of storage, which is pretty insane. Now, a few things I want to note is that going from the M1 MacBook Air to the M2 MacBook Air, you are getting an increase on the top line of RAM that you can get. So you can get up to 8 gigabytes more RAM on the top high-end, M2 MacBook Air than the top high-end, M1 MacBook Air. But the other thing is the storage models are staying the same. So you can get up to 2 terabytes of storage, and the battery life is staying the same as well. So if you were getting up to 18 hours of battery life on your M1 MacBook Air, you're getting up to 18 hours of battery life on your M2 MacBook Air. And the performance behind these MacBooks is also pretty wild. I feel like the M2 MacBook Air is a very good performing MacBook. Realistically speaking, no matter what I've done with that machine, it's been a pretty good time. I feel like Apple has done a really good job with macOS and making things very smooth for the most part. There's been issues, there's been little small things here and there, but as far as I remember and as far as I recall, there's not been like a massive recall behind these MacBooks. It's been pretty much the same thing like over and over again. Like the MacBook Airs are usually the most like suitable and the most like the least controversial Macs Apple makes. Usually it's like coming behind the heels of like a Pro model. So once a Pro model comes out, Apple kind of recycles something and puts it on their Air lineup at some point. This one was the notch, and by this point the notch was already kind of like an okay thing. So I would say overall the M2 MacBook Air is still completely worth buying. This is a very good machine that Apple made, and it really doesn't get like crazy amounts better than this in the price tag than this one. I will say though, if you aren't really needing all that much power, you might be okay with an M1 MacBook Air. That thing's probably going to be lasting for crazy amounts of time as well, and that one's not going anywhere anytime soon. So you're probably better off if you just buy something like an M1 MacBook Air if you want to save the most amount of money. You also have another option, and this other option is you basically have the ability of buying an M1 Pro MacBook Pro if you want to. I think those ones are very good. That's what I use every single day. It is an amazing machine, and I have no reason to ever upgrade probably for the next like 20,000 years. And you might be in a good spot if you just do something like that too. So take it as you will, but that's kind of how I see this MacBook Air holding up in 2023. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.